right now. David?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second seminar in this New Economy Summit webinar series. We're very pleased and thrilled that you could all join us this morning. And my name is David Jaffe. I'm the co-director of Successful Business Advisors, and I also am the director of Jaffe Lee & Associates, an accounting firm servicing the business community for close on 40 years. And this webinar series has come together as a result of my collaboration with Laurent, and in providing a value add to my client base, and also providing me some things to do other than just tax and JobKeeper. Yes, so that's me and Laurent.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Laurent Mas. I'm a business advisor by expertise and experience and an entrepreneur by passion. I'm a co-founder of Successful Business Advisors. And I'm very pleased to have you here this morning. Very pleased again on an amazing topic, emotional and leadership this morning. And I would like to introduce Tim Higgs. Tim Higgs is the founder and CEO of Catapult LPC, a business that helps organizations develop their leadership, performance, and culture via a unique hybrid method that saves time and cost while achieving effective behavioral change. Tim is also a narrative psychologist and an international best-selling author, and has worked across all levels of business and corporate leadership from new to the C-suite to help improve emotional intelligence and the ability to have their staff live up to their potential. Tim has helped scores of Australian and international organizations and a variety of industry verticals, including Deutsche Bank, DHL, IAG, Nestle, Seven West Media, Thales, and Toyota. Today, his topic is an antidote for difficult conversation after the COVID lockdown. Please enjoy and give a clap to Tim. Tim?
Thank you, Laurent. Appreciate it. So if you were on the call yesterday, you would have seen Chloe McCardle, and I have a similarity to Chloe. Not that I've swum the English Channel 31 times, and certainly not that I have swum the English Channel at all. In fact, I struggle probably to do more than 2Ks on the go. But between her and I, we share the idea that we really love interactive seminars and participation. And over 18 years of experience now in corporates, what I've found is that it makes it much more sticky for you in the information that you digest if you play along and you participate in the process. And so if you haven't found it yet, the chat is down the bottom. And so if you can engage in the chat process, what it will do is it will bring it to life and it will make it more valuable for you. So let's start just with a little bit of where you are, where you're located today, where you're ringing in from or dialing in from. And if you could just put that into the chat, that'd be great. We've got Singapore, pays back from Singapore. We've got a few in Sydney. We've got some from Melbourne. So that's great. Thank you for that. And so if you have ever been in a difficult conversation, if you could please put a yes or the letter Y in the chat. If you've ever had a difficult conversation, please put a yes or a Y in the chat. Great. So I've got a few people there. And if you've ever walked away from a difficult conversation going, "Oh, I wish I hadn't said that," or "Oh, I wish I'd said that instead," please put a yes in the chat. Please put a Y or a yes in the chat. Thank you. Yeah, lots of people are having experienced that. And if you would like a structure to be able to give you more confidence, more calm and connection in the potential face of conflict, please again put a yes or a Y in the chat. Thank you. Thank you. That's great. And if you're worried about getting a repetitive strain injury by putting too many yeses in the chat, please put another yes in the chat. Just kidding. You don't really need to be able to do that one. So, as Laurent said, I am Tim Higgs. And for those of you that don't know me, I am a leadership expert and also a best-selling author. But if you'd have known me 25 years ago, something you probably wouldn't know about me today back then was that I was experiencing a profound depression. Despite being trained in business and also having worked my way up to a management position in sales and marketing, I certainly wasn't across my emotional intelligence and being able to deal with some of the issues that I was going through back then. But I made a decision, and it was a good decision because the decision was to be able to reach out for help. So I took action, got some help with my issue, and through understanding myself a lot better, and some of the triggers that I was having at that time, I was able to make a full recovery. And it was through my recovery that I made another decision, and that was that I also wanted to be able to help people to overcome some of the struggles, the issues that they were going through, particularly around emotional issues. So I took action again. I retrained in psych. I eventually got my master's in narrative psychology. And for a period, I worked in private practice before about 18 years ago, moving into the corporate sector. And since that time, I've been dealing and helping with leaders to be able to overcome some of the struggles that they have, how to be able to motivate people, how to be able to motivate themselves, how to be able to get through some of the emotional issues that they might be going in, both in the relationships that they're building or trying to build, and also with some of the internal struggles that they might have for themselves. So fast forward up to about 3 years ago, and I was making another decision to be able to leave an organisation that I'd worked with in Sydney here for the past, for the 11 years at that stage. And basically I needed a platform to step out onto because I knew that I was going to have some restrictions on my trade for the year after I left. And I decided that I would write a book. And I was thinking about, well, what is the topic that I should write this book? What would help the most people? And what really rang true for me is the many, many pieces of feedback that I'd got on a lot of the leadership programs that I'd run over the many years. And that is that people resoundingly said the skills that they learned around having difficult conversations and dealing with pushback from their staff and customers and other people in the organisation were the skills that they found to be the most helpful. And so I put together a book called Emotional Judo, and it's communication skills to handle difficult conversations and boost emotional intelligence. And by the way, I'll be giving away one of these at the end of the session. But the book went on to be an Amazon bestseller, and it stayed at the top of its category over in the US on Amazon for 18 months, which really was a delight and a surprise for me. But what it really demonstrated to me is that these skills are really highly important. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you today is a little bit about some of these skills from the book and to expand the conversation around the idea of COVID. So I've now dedicated myself to being able to help leaders to be able to have more than just difficult conversations, influential conversations, and to be able to help be great stewards for the people that they lead. So let me just go into the screen share mode now and have a look at what we're getting into today. So what we're looking at is an antidote for difficult conversations after the COVID lockdown. And so just making sure that there we go. So 3 things that you can be sure of on the other side of the lockdown. There's a lot of uncertainty around this particular situation. You probably heard the word unprecedented many, many times during the course of the last 2.5 months. But if you go back to 1918, even for those that were on the planet at that time experiencing the Spanish flu, would never have experienced what we're experiencing today, because today is not 1918. So this really is uncharted territory, and Morris Mizalowski is a futurist. He'll be speaking, I believe, on the 29th of June, and he'll be talking about some of the ideas that we can predict to have happen. But I'm not a futurist, but I can be certain that these 3 things are going to be there and are going to be things that you need to be able to pay attention to. The second is, what do you need and what do they need? So who are they? They will be your staff members. They will be your customers. They may even be suppliers that you use. But we're looking at being able to have better outcomes in the conversations that we're having to be able to optimize this uncharted territory that we're going into. And then we'll look at the antidote. And the antidote is a 4-step process that does come from the book Emotional Judo. And it's how to handle difficult conversations with ease. So if you could just play along again and just put an ease in the chat box, because this word is going to be your best friend by the end of this presentation. Just put another ease in the chat box for me there. And that word, I just want to remind you of, is going to be very important by the end of this presentation. So gain greater confidence and calmness through structure is a very, very important component. So the book, Emotional Judo, does go through 10 specific structures for different situations that you might encounter that will help you to have that structure to aid that confidence and calmness. So let's have a look at the 3 things that you can be sure of on the other side of the lockdown. The first thing is that until we find a vaccine or an antidote for this virus, there will be a need for you to be able to keep your staff and customers safe. So life before the COVID situation hit will still be very, very different for a while before it might get back into the normal logistics. But even now, with what we're learning from people being remote, people being able to still transact business from their homes and so forth, the scene will probably be a lot different, even if we're not dealing with all of the safety issues from now on, because we've learned a lot of what we can do by using technology. The second thing is that there are lots of opportunities that lie ahead for you in this current time. And so what happens often in a crisis is it means that we've got to really get down to the essentials. And so you have a real opportunity at this moment to be able to craft your organizations to the vision that you really desire, that you can start to gel the culture that you've been desiring as well. But to do that, the third thing that you're going to, that you can be sure of, is that you're going to need to have difficult conversations. You're going to need to be able to influence people to be able to get on your journey. You're going to need to manage change situations and take people with you on that journey. And so these skills of having difficult conversations, to me, are one of the most important skill sets that leaders can gather. Because despite having all of the financial acumen and the great ideas for innovation and so forth, to get people on your journey and to be able to make sure that they're behaving and performing in a way that is going to be useful to be able to reach your vision, you're going to have these difficult conversations. Yet, I have heard right at the moment that some people and culture or HR budgets are contracting, and so people are now sort of saying, well, maybe we need to be able to spend our money on other things. So I'm saying to you, don't leave your change to chance. You need to be able to upskill people in order to be able to have these difficult conversations, because the statistics are not great. So let me share a few of the statistics with you. According to the Centre for Effective Dispute Resolution over in the UK, 35% of leaders would prefer to jump out of an aeroplane than have a difficult conversation, which is pretty startling. So just put a yes in the chat box if you're a bit of an adrenaline junkie and you've ever jumped out of an aeroplane, or perhaps you're an ex-military person and you've had to jump out of an aeroplane. Are there any yeses in the audience there? No, we don't. Oh yeah. Well, we've got some acronyms coming through there. I won't express what that acronym might mean. So we've got a few no's. Well, I have jumped out of an aeroplane, and I must say that I was very grateful that I had my brown corduroys on that day, because I must say that it was a very, very challenging situation for me, and I much prefer to have a difficult conversation. And especially if you have the right tools to be able to have that difficult conversation. So another stat that you might like to know is that 75% of careers, leaders' careers, often get derailed. And this comes from the Centre for Creative Leadership over in the US. And what that's meaning is that they often don't have the skills to be able to navigate those difficult conversations, to be able to have people performing to their potential, to be able to steer their teams through the potential of conflict. And what ends up happening is when change comes along, they're unable to be able to take people on that journey because they find it difficult to manage some of the difficult conversations and emotionality around that. So what ends up happening is what's called the Peter Principle. And the Peter Principle is named after a Canadian academic called Lawrence Peter. He was also an advisor to many organisations. And basically what he said is that people get promoted to their level of incompetence. That means they do the job, they can do it well. They end up getting a transfer into another position. They do the job, they do it well, they get another promotion. They're now in a place where they haven't got the skill set to be able to do what's necessary for them at that level. And that's what we're talking about, these 75% of careers that sometimes get derailed because of that lack of capability to be able to go further in their career. So this all comes at a cost to businesses. And the costs are both financial and non-financial. So some of the non-financial costs are you get good staff leaving. So it's often the good staff that leave. And there is a saying that people don't leave businesses, they leave people. They often leave managers that they find to be a little bit too overbearing, or they're not giving any feedback at all. And so they leave the organisation. They say, look, I'm going to go somewhere else where I'm more appreciated. This can also be then a disruption of time, the time that it takes to be able to then get people replaced, the lack of productivity that sometimes comes by not having those difficult conversations and so forth. And of course, there's a financial cost, which I'll talk about in just a second, but there's a big cost sometimes that comes to a battered reputation. And that can mean that when those good staff leave, they are potentially telling other people out there in the community, well, don't go and work at that organisation. It's not a great organisation to work for. And so therefore getting replacement staff is difficult. But even worse than that, the people that you don't want to leave your organisation, especially at this time, are the people who are your customers. So having a damaged reputation out there in the marketplace can also be dire, because when the inside starts leaking to the outside by missed deadlines, by challenges to being able to deliver, etc., then that can be quite impactful. So here are some of the monetary costs that are associated with that. And so I just want to draw your attention to the second one there, that is 70% of employees. So we said 35% of leaders would prefer to be able to jump out of an aeroplane rather than having the difficult conversations. Well, other members of your staff are also avoiding it. So that means they're not addressing issues that you might need to know. Perhaps they don't feel that they have the capability to be able to speak up. So this is a big challenge to organisations and as you as leaders, to be able to help to minimise the impact of poor communication. So a lot of people ask me, why judo? Why did you choose a martial art when we're talking about how not being conflictual? So, so emotional judo is a way of being able to have conversations that isn't conflictual. So I'll tell you why I chose the metaphor of judo. Judo in Japanese literally means the gentle way. And so I thought, well, that in itself is a really good idea. But even further than that, the premise of judo is that when an attacker comes at you, you use the energy or the force or momentum that they've brought into the system as part of the way in which you grapple with them to be able to bring them down. Now, of course, we don't want to bring people down in the conversations that we're having, but the metaphor still exists for us there. And that is that when a person is a bit sharp, a bit acidic, you know, that they're bringing some negative energy into the relationship with you, what's happening is you need to dissipate that energy before you take it artfully around to be able to position what you need to be able to say in that conversation. So what happens for a lot of people is that instead of playing emotional judo, they do emotional karate. The negative force comes at them, and in order to defend, they come back with an equal or opposing opposite force. And so what happens there is now we get an escalation, and the escalation is not good. So what do you need? What skills do you need? What do you need to be able to get better at having these difficult conversations? But before we start on that, I want to talk to you about what do they need. And I said before that they are your customers. They may be your staff members. They may be other colleagues of yours across an organisation, or they could even be a person who is above you in an organisation if you work in a larger organisation. But if you're the boss, it's all about what do your staff potentially need. Well, one of the things that they need is significance, because every human being needs to feel significance at some level. It is one of the 6 human needs from human needs psychology. And so every person needs to feel significant. Now, that doesn't mean to say that they need to be dressed up like this dog, but what they do need is that potential to be able to feel like they're respected, like they're acknowledged for the job that they do, that they matter, that they are valuable. And so that is one of the things that every human being needs. And this dynamic is important in every conversation that you have. Because here's why this is important to being able to manage difficult conversations. In every conversation that you have, somebody will be taking a position of significance in that conversation. Right here at the moment, I am taking significance in the conversation because you are all listening to me. But it doesn't mean that I have to make you insignificant. So let me demonstrate what I mean. So in the book, Emotional Judo, I illustrate this point by considering judo mats that are spread out like this on a dojo. A dojo is a place where judo fights and martial arts take place. And so if you imagine that significance are in the top mats there and insignificance or less significance are down the bottom. Like I was just saying, it doesn't mean because I happen to be taking significance in talking to you this morning that you will be insignificant. You just may be less significant when you are listening to me than otherwise when we're talking in a different way. On the left-hand side, we have a negative outcome. And on the right-hand side, we have positive. And this is really, really important to understand the dynamics about what goes on in a difficult conversation. Because in difficult conversations that go poorly, we're usually playing over on the negative side of the mats. In difficult conversations that go well, we're usually playing over the positive side of the mats. And that's what the 10 structures in emotional judo help to be able to get you to do, is play over the positive side of the mats. So because these names are very cumbersome, like positive significance and negative insignificance, I have renamed these mats. So the gatecrasher is a person who takes significance by seizing significance. They usually do it by being blunt, perhaps a bit aggressive about what they're doing. Maybe they're being passive-aggressive in order to be able to get their sense of significance. But in any case, it feels very, very uncomfortable with the way that they tend to seize significance. The uninvited person is the person who hasn't been invited to the party or potentially doesn't take up the invitation themselves. This is a person that is likely to feel uncomfortable about the process of speaking up. They're quite often lacking in putting themselves forward for being able to perhaps take on more responsibilities. They don't have a confidence in their own capacity to be able to do whatever it is that they need to do, or simply they don't have the capacity to be able to have those difficult conversations. On the right-hand side of the mats, the inviter does behaviour which is basically that they massage the process of the relationship to have people feel more comfortable. And then the invited person is usually the person who has the subject matter expertise, the acumen, the leadership capabilities, the astute knowledge that will steer the course in a positive way rather than simply seizing the floor. Now, it is possible to move into invited by yourself, but there's a particular strategy. So if I go back to what do you need, what you need is some information or some skills and resources to be able to steer your way around those mats in a positive way, to understand what's going on in this relationship here. How can I make this a little bit more effective so that I can steer this conversation to a place which is going to be more productive and get win-win outcomes, or steer you toward the purpose of what you would like to get out of the conversation. And so in that process, what we really need is a way to be able to move over to the inviter area, because when things are getting a bit heated in a gatecrasher, uninvited situation, then it can be a little bit dire. Now, this morning I was talking to a person that I'm coaching from a very, very large organization over in the US. He's in San Francisco. And he was giving me an example of a situation that he had happen. He said, look, I've got this guy, he's the IT manager, and he's often missing deadlines, and that's impacting my ability to be able to deliver what I need to be able to deliver. So the guy that I'm coaching is also a fairly senior manager in this organization, and so this is colleague to colleague. And so when he addresses the issue with the other person then gets defensive around whatever it is that they're doing. So the other person will start to say, the IT manager generally says, well, you know, we've had resource issues, we've had cutbacks and so forth. I simply don't have the ability to be able to deal with the deadlines that you're talking about, or words to that effect. So in that situation, what he's doing is he's becoming defensive and moving up into gatecrasher. And that's where the guy that I'm coaching also can have that potential to then join him, because in that process, he's now being not considered. And as a result of that, what's ending up happening is he's potentially being pushed into uninvited, because there's a lack of consideration there from the IT person. So the person that I'm coaching, his usual thing is to jump up and defend himself in gatecrasher. And so what ends up happening is we get what's called a significance escalation. People start hammering at each other from gatecrasher, and that's where you get that reputation that difficult conversations are things to be avoided at all cost, because it's a really, really harrowing and unpleasant experience. So what we need to potentially do is have some structure behind us that when the anxiety creeps in, when the sense of resentment creeps in about what might be going on, that instead of playing in that dynamic that we may be used to, we can move across to the inviter or the invited. And generally we will need to move to the inviter first before we can move up to the invited. So let me show you what it is that I mean. Oh, by the way, there is an assessment that you can do for this on my website. This is a hidden page which is usually only available to you from my Emotional Judo book. But if you want to take it down, it's just simply www.emotionaljudo.com/register here. And so what that will do is it will take you to a place where you can answer a series of questions. You will end up getting two separate emails that will deliver how comfortable you might feel in taking significance or in dropping in significance, and then whether or not you potentially are operating on the negative side of the mats or the positive side of the mats. So you might want to just avail yourself of that. So I did say before that I was going to take you through a 4-part structure to be able to go through difficult conversations with what? So play along with me again in the chat box. Did I say effort or did I say the other word? What was the word that I came up with? Yeah, thank you. It was with ease. So let's have a look at this 4-part structure that we're going to go through, and ease is the acronym to be able to make this a little bit more sticky for you. So the 4-part structure of ease is actually the first reason why I wrote this book of emotional judo, because it's the best example of how emotional judo works. Basically, what you need to do is empathize with the other person's point of view. So in that example that I just gave of the defensive IT leader, basically what I would say to that person is, okay, I appreciate that it has been difficult for you with a lot of the cutbacks and that you have been short-staffed. So I'm just acknowledging that that situation exists for the other person. I validate their situation. I then assert my own position, which I'll talk about in a little bit. I suggest a way forward out of the impasse, and then I need to expect that they're not necessarily going to accept my suggestion on face value, that we might need to have a little bit of back and forth and negotiation in this process to be able to come to an outcome where they win and where I win. And so what this is doing in this situation is it's going back to the judo mats. By empathizing with the other person around their situation and validating their viewpoint, I then move into the inviter quadrant on the mats. And by doing that, I'm putting myself down, I'm acknowledging their situation, so I'm moving them into higher significance. And then because I've done that, it's much more likely that they're going to accept my next move, which is me asserting. And that's where I move then up into invited, and I start steering the conversation in a good way to be able to then move it away from the negative side of the mats and to a place where we can get a productive outcome. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the components here. I often make the joke when I'm doing a lot of facilitation work that although 94% of the population can empathize, we often haven't been taught how to do empathy well. In fact, quite a lot of women are socialized to sympathize and not empathize. And quite a lot of men are socialized never to go anywhere near their feelings at all. And so they often then don't make this potential move toward empathizing with other people. And that's the challenge of the guy that I'm working with over in San Francisco. He's a very, very technical person, and he hasn't been schooled in these ideas of being able to do that. But he's highly capable of doing it. It's just a little bit clunky for him because he doesn't understand potentially the process and he hasn't practiced it a lot. So empathy is one of those things that you need to practice on as many occasions as possible so you can get good at it. And there are some starters that you might like to understand to be able to help to take you to that place. There are definitely some things that I will warn you about not saying, and they are simply saying to another person, I understand, because that's actually going to raise their ire rather than potentially calm them down. Or I totally understand where you're coming from. You know, when I was in your position, I used to have blah. Now where's the spotlight going? It's going on to you, not onto them. And also things like saying, yeah, I feel your pain. That's more of a sympathy statement than it is an empathy statement. So there are some specific ways to be able to have these empathy statements. And as you heard me probably say before, you know, I acknowledge that there have been some issues that have been happening in the area of IT, or something like, I can appreciate that this has been a difficult time for you with a lack of resources, or something like that. Now, the next thing is, just before I move to the end, to be able to then say that sometimes after an empathy statement, people will then say how they are then coming across. So, sorry, Michelle has just written in the chat, is this a gendered argument, Tim? Definitely not. As I did say, it's about how people might be socialized, Michelle. And I just wanted to point out, this is not about gender at all. Quite often, all human beings aren't taught to be able to do empathy well. I was just basically saying that they're socialized sometimes to be able to sympathize and socialized sometimes not to go near their feelings. But I'm very hopeful of the fact that men are becoming more in touch with their feelings, and that women are moving away from simply sympathising as well. So just go back on that thing that I was just saying then. What happens after the empathy statement for a lot of people is that they use words such as but or however. And so in doing so, what they do is they just diminish the very fact that they've built up a whole lot of rapport and brownie points by empathising with the person. And so the solution to this is simply putting a full stop between the empathy statement and also the assertion. So basically what I say is, you know, I respect the fact that you have had some challenges with staffing and a lack of resources, full stop. My issue is deadlines being missed is not a good thing. It's the lack of forewarning that we have about the missed deadline that I'm concerned about. What I would suggest is that in the future, we work in a process where if you are not going to meet the deadline, you give us due warning so that we can be prepared for it at our end when there's going to be that missed deadline. What are your thoughts about that? And now we then bring it back into offering them whether or not they accept that idea or not. Okay, so let's then move on. One of the things that I do have right at the moment on offer is that I'm moving on to another book, and I am beta testing a 6-week program. So just put a thing in the chat just regarding whether or not you found that ease process was useful or not. Yep, got a few people there. Yeah, thank you. So what I want to be able to do is offer you something which I think is going to be of greater use for you. At the moment, as I said, I'm beta testing a 6-week program on the inner game of emotional judo. The inner game of the emotional judo is all about the skills that you have internally to be able to have the courage, the confidence and resources to be able to have some of those difficult conversations, but it's about motivation and things like that as well. And so it's really about enhancing the emotional intelligence. It includes the emotional capital report, which is a 360-degree tool. And because it's a beta test, I'm doing a ridiculous reduction from $1,540 down to $197. But to get that price, there are some conditions that are involved. So that price will only hold until the end of this week. And so that happens to be my birthday. So, so on my birthday, if you could get back to me, if you're interested in getting some details, you don't have to go ahead with it or whatever it is. But if you want to know what the conditions are and how you can get access to being able to grow your emotional quotient and use a very validated and verified tool to be able to help to measure or benchmark where you're starting from, then this is a great potential opportunity, and it will also be helpful for me because of the potential feedback that you might give. Okay, so that said, let's do a quick review and then I'll move to questions that people might have. So firstly, we've gone through what are the 3 things you can be sure of, that you'll need to keep your staff and customers safe, that you will need to be able to take opportunity out of this process to be able to move your organisation to the vision and the culture that you desire. And to do that, you're going to need to be able to have difficult conversations. We've talked about what you and they need, and that's pretty much an understanding of significance and how you can master the process of being able to make people feel more significance in that process. And finally, to be able to have difficult conversations with ease, the 4-part program. So I've got, does this process work well? Let me just pull that out because it's hiding a little bit. With people who automatically play victim and deflect back. Okay, so that's exactly where I'm going right at the moment. So thanks for that. I'm as blind as anything with writing this size. So thank you, Robert, for that. I'm going to have to put my glasses on and pretend. I was pretending that I wasn't old. So so what we're going to go into now is the Q&A. And so if you do have any other questions, so thank you, Robert, for that. I'll answer that in just a second. Then please add to the chat box any questions that you might have. So, Robert, the answer to that is yes, it does work. The thing about it is that you may need to go around a few times. So in that instance where the person then might play victim, then what that is one of the 7 pushbacks, or what I call sneaky tactics that people use. And so another thing that you might like to write down, I didn't put that in here, but if you go to the site emotionaljudo.com, in the free section there is a way that you can get access to a small snippet of emotional judo, which is the 7 pushbacks or sneaky tricks that people use within conversations. So what that'll do is it'll alert you to these behaviours that people often do to potentially derail your conversations with them. And so so that will make you aware of how that process works. And what you can then do is you go around again with the ease process, but this time you have a slight deviation in what it is that you're saying. So you might say, if the person then played victim and then got defensive, you might then say, you know, I appreciate that this is not sitting well with you, and that it's not something that you're easily dealing with. What I'd like to say is, and then you're now going back into the domain of whatever it is that you were talking about before. So usually what I coach people to be able to do is make sure that that domain that you're speaking about is within a business context, especially if you're having these conversations in a business. By the way, you can use these in your personal life as well. The only issue with that is I wouldn't put it into the business context. So basically what you might need to do is go around a few times with the ease process. And there is another thing in the book which talks about that. It's basically another structure in the book that helps you to be able to go through that revolving process and take it out. So Michelle's asked, how do you advise when conflict escalates? How do I advise when conflict? I'm not exactly sure what you mean, how do I advise? Do you mean me being the advisor to the person, or what to do in the situation of escalation? I'm going to take it as the second one. And so if conflict does escalate, there are 2 ways to potentially deal with it. Is just go down into the inviter part. Do behaviours that potentially will place the other person into comfortable significance. They're not necessarily behaviours that put you into a insignificant place. What they will do, such as empathy, as an example, is to be able to have the person be acknowledged for where they're at. Empathy, by the way, is not agreement. It's basically saying to the other person this is what I understand is going on for you. And by naming it, you often tame it. And so there's another structure in emotional judo about name it to tame it. But what that is about is basically saying, well, okay, this is what I understand is going on for you. And by doing that quite a lot, you're likely to bring it over to the other side. People will start to put down their want to be able to do emotional karate and start to de-escalate that process. Now, if a person is rabid, they're really caught up, they've had what we call an amygdala hijack. That means that they've been flooded with their emotion. Then sometimes what you need to be able to do is just say, look, you're going to have to take a little bit on the chin in this particular way, is that we're getting a little bit heated here. So the interaction between us is getting a little bit heated. So we're getting a little bit heated here. Let's just have a little bit of time apart, and then we will come back and bring some closure to what it is that we're talking about, and just remove yourself from the scene. Most people in that situation, they just remove themselves from the scene. And so what they do is they leave the other person in the lurch going, but I was going to talk about, and that potentially escalates and inflames, because that's like giving the silent treatment, which is one of the 7 sneaky tricks. So what you want to be able to do is say, we are going to come back and talk to this, about this, but at another time when it's better to do so. And so that's probably the way that that we can de-escalate. Okay, so there are a few other questions that are coming through here. I hope that does that sort of answer, Michelle, what you were looking at? So just let me just see. So Michelle says, in the sensitive context of management, where language can be deliberately misconstrued, how can a manager react to defend their issue without increasing conflict? So it sort of answers your question. Great, thank you very much. So let me go back to Sanjay. Sanjay saying, Tim, I found some managers only keep on repeating lack of resources as productivity, as their productivity. How many times should we try to change rather than leave to chance for the person to change? Okay, so what I'm assuming about that, Sanjay, is that what you're saying is that you consider that people are sort of like using the lack of resources as an excuse, and then you never get to being able to solve the problem. So one of the things that the person that I was working with this morning sort of said, because we were doing a bit of role playing in what he was doing, is that he said that we've all got to work with less resources, and that's part of the organisation's thing. I won't say who the organisation is, but that's part of what the organisation's about at the moment. We've got to do more with less. So the challenge of saying a statement like that is that you're now just making that uniform across the organisation, that everyone is under the same pressure. And so what you need to be able to do is just to acknowledge that the person, in their view, maybe not be in your view, has that issue with resourcing. And you could simply say, okay, I appreciate that you have got some issue with resourcing. Given that that is the case, so now I've gone into the assert part, given that that is the case, what do you suggest we do to make sure that we don't miss these deadlines in the future? So now what we're doing in the situation there is that in the suggest bar, we're inviting them to collaborate with us in order to be able to move the needle of the conversation. Because if you start saying, well, everyone's got the same issues of resourcing, then what will happen, Sanjay, is that you will find that they're going to, it's going to sort of be argy-bargy. You're going to start playing over in the gate crasher again. So if you are acknowledging of their viewpoint and then trying to work with them in a collaborative exercise to then work out how you can solve the problem together and then get commitments from them that they're going to start doing that, you'll move out of the content and he said, she said type of encounter that you've been in before, and you'll start working toward win-win. Does that work for you? Great. Okay. Thank you. Now I'm going up and down, hoping that I'm not missing anyone's questions here. A lot of times people just want to be heard. That's exactly right. And that is is one of the things that this process is about, is being able to then have that sensitivity and to listen. So from a participant that couldn't make it this morning, I don't feel confident to talk to my team about behaviour issues for fear that their performance will go down. Okay, so one of the things about that, how are we going for time? I think we've got about 5 minutes more on the stated time,
Yes,
but I'm
correct.
happy to ask
Correct.
questions.
Yeah.
Answer questions, beg your pardon. So, sorry, just before I go into that one, Michelle also said, when do you invite the third party to participate in diluting conflict between the two parties? So the answer to that is it depends on the person. If this person has had a history of reporting back to human resources, has had an issue in terms of being able to escalate things or potentially accuse you of stuff, then right from the get-go, you probably need a person in there, not to dilute the conflict between you, but to bear as witness. They can have one and you can have one, and it's a very, very prudent way to be able to go through the process. So the answer then to the question is, when do you bring in a third party? You generally don't want to bring in the third party unless it's very dire, because if you are working in a larger organisation and you always have to go to the umpire in order to be able to sort out stuff for you, you'll get a little bit of a black mark against your name. That means that you will be known as a person that can't deal with the potential conflict that's happening in your area. So what you potentially want to do is make sure that you can go through some of the steps to be able to resolve it. But if you can't find that resolution, then you might have to escalate it. But really what these skills are about is being able to keep it at your domain so that you can sort stuff out, acknowledge where the problems exist, and then try and work together in order for that to be able to be fixed up. Now, that doesn't happen in all organisations. There are some organisations that don't have the capacity to be able to deal with problems at that level. I'm not going to name who they are, but or the type of organisation. But there are some specific issues that can happen within organisations that then make it more difficult to be able to deal with that. So going back to that one that Laurent said about the person who couldn't make it. So what do we do about that behaviour? So the whole purpose of these tools is to be able to have those behaviour issues. So it's also about naming the elephant in the room. So for this, the classic example of this very question is where you've got a salesperson who's a rainmaker. They're fantastic at bringing the revenue in, but they're behaving poorly. If you don't address that behaviour, the problem is that it gives other people permission that they can also behave like that, and then it becomes a management nightmare. So the whole point about these tools are to address those issues and to be able to name the elephant in the room. I would want to think that in having this conversation with you, that this isn't going to jeopardize your performance. Let's just talk about that, and let's talk through the potential scenario that's going to happen, so that once you've talked about it, it's then something that's less likely to happen, because you've sort of got it off the table, and it's more likely that you're going to get through it. Do you think recording conversations help where there is conflict? Well, they could, but it's a bit of an invasion of privacy to do that. And you would imagine that if you went, look, just a second, I'm just going to turn on the record button here. It's not going to potentially go down well with the person on the other side. But certainly it's a strategy. I mean, you just need to look at some of the footage that's been taken recently of the way that police have been behaving in certain instances, and certainly it's got being able to record stuff has a virtue. But then there's a human rights and privacy issue that might be involved in some of that stuff as well. So I would say it's better to actually get other people maybe involved in the thing rather than recording it, Sanjay, because can almost cripple the conversation process because people don't feel at liberty to be themselves. So we've got to the 12 o'clock point here.
Yes.
So thank you everyone for those great questions, and so just to go back into that quick recap, we've talked about the three things you can be sure of, what you and they need, and then I've been talking about the significance mats and going through that 4-step process with ease. I hope that that's been valuable for you and that you can start to put that into practice readily. So start practicing it readily, and please do check out the idea of coming and joining me on this 6-week program. It would be great to have you on there, and I look forward to speaking with you in some way soon. If you're not interested in that, just reach out to me with a question at tim@emotionaljudo.com. And so that brings us to the book. Hold on, let me get out of this, stop sharing. So if you can tell me, what does the S in ease stand for? First one in the chat. Yes. Okay. Sanjay got there first.
Yes.
So Sanjay, this book is coming out to you. If you could please, if you've taken down my emotional judo address, then just send something to me so that I can get your address, and I will send out the physical copy to you. So thanks everyone. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. And I look forward to helping you some more in some way.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. It was a fantastic presentation, and I think everybody got a lot out of it, and I really want to thank you from both of us here for your presentation today. We look forward to working with you in the future, and thanks to everyone for attending.
Yes, thank you so much, Tim, again. And everyone will receive an email with Tim details and the offer for the beta test to join him on the 6-week program. I invite you to join us tomorrow for real Bergen-Doyle entrepreneurs, and that will cover the strategy to drive in this new economy. And we wish you a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining. See you tomorrow.
See you. Bye.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Bye.